Frank Miller woke up before the sun, the way he had for most of his life, even though there was no real reason to anymore. His alarm clock had broken years ago, but his body didn't need it. Habit was stronger than time. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling fan that no longer worked, listening to the silence that filled the small house. Silence had become his closest companion. The house smelled faintly of oil, old wood, and memories that refused to fade. Frank swung his legs off the bed slowly, joints protesting like rusted hinges. Every movement reminded him of his age, but he never complained. Complaining didn't fix anything. It never had. He dressed the same way every day, faded jeans, a clean but worn flannel shirt, and his boots, scuffed and cracked from decades of standing on concrete floors. Before leaving, he paused in the hallway where a framed photograph still hung crooked. It showed him and his wife, Eleanor, standing in front of the garage on its opening day. She was smiling the way only someone who truly believed in you could smile. "Another day," Frank murmured softly, not knowing whether he was talking to her or himself. The garage sat 2 blocks down, squeezed between a closed bakery and a pawn shop that seemed to survive no matter what. The sign above the garage read, "Miller Auto Repair," though half the letters had faded. People drove past it now without noticing. Years ago, cars would line the street. Back then, Frank had been the man everyone trusted, the mechanic who could fix anything, the man who didn't cheat, didn't rush, didn't lie. Times changed. Frank didn't. Inside the garage, dust floated through the air as sunlight slipped through the high windows. Tools hung neatly on the wall, each one placed with intention. Frank believed tools had memories. Treat them right, and they treat you right back. He ran his fingers along the workbench, feeling the grooves worn by decades of labor. Business that day was slow. One oil change in the morning, a quick brake adjustment before lunch. By mid-afternoon, the garage was quiet again. Too quiet. Frank sat on his old stool, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, listening to the distant sound of traffic and the ticking of the wall clock. He thought about closing early. He'd been doing that more often lately. There was no point staying open when no one came. Just as he stood to turn off the lights, he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the quiet rhythm of the street. A car engine sputtering, coughing, fighting to stay alive. Frank looked up as a dark sedan rolled unsteadily toward the garage, jerking forward before finally stalling right at the edge of his driveway. Steam rose from beneath the hood like a final sigh. The driver sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, head bowed. Then the door opened. The man who stepped out didn't look like someone who belonged in this part of town. His coat was expensive, his shoes were clean, but his face told another story. Tight jaw, furrowed brow, eyes weighed down by something heavier than exhaustion. "I'm really sorry," the man said as he approached. His voice wasn't arrogant, it wasn't demanding, it was desperate. "I don't know what happened. The car just gave up." Frank studied him quietly. Years of working with people had taught him more than any conversation ever could. He noticed the man's clean hands, the faint tremble in his fingers, the way he kept glancing at his phone like time was chasing him. "Pop the hood," Frank said simply. The man did as he was told, watching anxiously as Frank leaned in. The smell hit him instantly, coolant, rubber, heat. Frank didn't need a scanner or a computer. He listened. He always listened. It took him less than a minute to find the problem. A cracked hose, old and brittle. Cheap part, simple fix. The kind of thing that could ruin someone's day if ignored, or save it if caught in time. The man hovered nervously. I don't have much cash on me," he said, "but I can come back tomorrow. Or wire it, or whatever you need." Frank straightened up slowly. His back ached, but he ignored it. He replaced the hose, tightened the clamp, wiped his hands on his rag. Then he closed the hood with a soft final click. "That'll do it," he said. The man blinked. "That's it?" Frank nodded. The man reached for his wallet. "How much do I owe you?" Frank hesitated, not because he was calculating a price, but because he was remembering something. A night long ago when his own car had broken down. A stranger who'd helped him without asking for anything. Eleanor's voice telling him that kindness only disappears if people stop passing it on. He exhaled quietly. "Nothing," Frank said. The man froze. I'm sorry, what? Free, Frank repeated. You're good to go. The stranger stared at him, disbelief written across his face. Sir, I can't just... Frank held up a hand. Car needed fixing. I fixed it. That's all. Something shifted in the air. The man swallowed, nodding slowly. Thank you, he said, his voice lower now. Real. I won't forget this. Frank gave a polite smile. He'd heard those words before. They usually disappeared as quickly as the taillights. The car drove away, merging into traffic, leaving behind nothing but silence and the faint smell of exhaust. Frank locked up shortly after. As he walked home, the evening air felt colder than usual. He wondered briefly if he'd made a foolish choice. Business was already slow. 3 repairs didn't pay bills. That night, he ate alone again. Soup, bread, the radio humming softly in the background. He sat at the table longer than usual, staring at nothing in particular. Real smart, Frank, he muttered. But somewhere across the city, the stranger sat in his parked car, engine off, replaying the moment over and over. An old man, a cracked hose, and a kindness that didn't make sense. Frank didn't know it yet. But that simple choice had already begun moving pieces he couldn't see. If stories about quiet kindness and unseen sacrifices still mean something to you, subscribe to Old Whisper Stories. These stories don't shout, they stay with you. Frank noticed the footsteps before he heard the voices. At first, he thought it was his imagination. The garage had been quiet all morning. No engines, no radios, no customers asking for discounts he couldn't afford to give. Just the familiar hum of age and routine. But then came the sound again. Shoes, more than one pair, measured, purposeful. He straightened slowly, wiping his hands on his rag, heart beating a little faster than it should have. People didn't come in groups anymore, not to his garage. The shadow of someone passed by the frosted glass of the office window. Then another, then another. Before Frank could call out, the garage door began to rise. The metal rattled as it rolled upward, light spilling across the concrete floor. Frank squinted, his eyes adjusting, his mind racing through possibilities that didn't make sense. Customers didn't arrive like this. Inspectors usually sent letters, and strangers. Strangers rarely came at all. 5 people stood at the entrance. Frank's first instinct wasn't excitement. It was fear. 2 men wore suits, not cheap ones. Clean lines, polished shoes. A woman stood beside them holding a clipboard. Her posture confident, professional. A younger man hovered slightly behind them with a camera, adjusting the strap on his shoulder. And then Frank saw him, the stranger from last week. But he didn't look lost this time. He didn't look stressed or desperate. He stood tall, calm, almost grounded, like a man who belonged exactly where he was. Frank's mouth went dry. For a moment, no one spoke. The garage felt smaller somehow, like it was holding its breath. Mr. Miller, the stranger finally said, stepping forward. Frank flinched slightly. Hearing his name from someone he didn't know sent a chill through him. That's me, he replied cautiously. My name is Daniel Hayes, the man said, extending his hand. Frank hesitated before shaking it. Daniel's grip was firm but respectful. Not dominating, not weak. I didn't know you were coming back, Frank said. Daniel nodded. I wasn't sure I would either. Frank's eyes moved to the others. If this is about some problem, I don't cut corners. Never have. The woman with the clipboard glanced up, surprised. One of the suited men shifted his weight. Daniel raised a hand gently. No. This isn't about that. Frank didn't relax. He'd lived long enough to know that when people showed up unannounced, it usually meant trouble. Fines, closures, notices. He didn't fully understand anymore. He suddenly felt old in a way he hated. Daniel took a slow breath. Last week, when my car broke down, I was on my way to shut this place down. The words landed like a punch. Frank felt it in his chest first, then his knees. He grabbed the edge of the workbench without realizing it. Shut it down? He repeated quietly. Daniel nodded. I own Hayes Automotive Group, 36 dealerships across 4 states. Frank didn't know what to say. The name meant nothing to him, but the tone didn't. He'd heard it before. Big companies, buyouts, closures. So you fixed my car, Daniel continued, without knowing who I was, without asking anything. And I drove away planning to end your livelihood. The silence that followed was heavy. Frank swallowed hard. Then why are you here? He asked, his voice barely steady. Because I couldn't sleep, Daniel said. That wasn't what Frank expected. Daniel looked around the garage slowly. The old tools, the cracked floor, the faded sign visible through the open door. I kept thinking about how you didn't hesitate, Daniel said. You didn't check my wallet, didn't ask for my name, you just helped. Frank looked down. That's what people used to do, he said quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened. No, he replied. That's what people should still do. But they don't. He turned to the woman with the clipboard. She stepped forward. Mr. Miller, she said, smiling warmly now. We've reviewed your business history, your reputation, your record. You've never failed an inspection, never had a complaint. Frank's hands trembled. Daniel met his eyes. I don't want to close this garage. Frank's breath caught. I want to invest in it. The words echoed in Frank's head. Invest. Not buy, not replace, not erase. New equipment, the woman continued. Renovations, updated systems, and full coverage of expenses during the transition. Frank felt dizzy. Why? He asked honestly. There are bigger places, better locations. Daniel smiled faintly. Because places like this matter, and people like you are disappearing. The camera operator shifted slightly, capturing the moment, but Frank barely noticed. What do you want from me? Frank asked. Daniel shook his head. Nothing, except to stay. Frank sat down heavily on the stool. His mind raced back to Eleanor, to the years they'd built this place together, to the nights he'd wondered how much longer he could keep going. I don't know computers, Frank said quietly. I don't know modern systems. Daniel knelt slightly so they were eye level. Then teach what you do know. Frank looked up. Teach the kids who come through our training programs, Daniel said. The ones who never had a chance. Show them how to listen to an engine, how to respect the work. Tears welled in Frank's eyes before he could stop them. Frank stood slowly. I'll stay, he said. But the sign doesn't change. Daniel smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The garage door stayed open that day. People walked by and stared. For the first time in years, Frank felt like the world hadn't passed him by after all. Stories like this don't happen every day, but they still happen. If you believe quiet kindness can change lives, subscribe to Old Whisper Stories. Some doors only open when you least expect them. For the rest of that morning, Frank moved through the garage like a man walking inside a dream. The others eventually stepped back, giving him space, but their presence lingered in the air. The smell of oil and metal was the same. The tools hung where they always had, yet everything felt different, as if the walls themselves had shifted slightly, making room for something new. Daniel stayed. That surprised Frank the most. He didn't check his phone every few seconds, didn't rush. He leaned against the workbench and listened as Frank talked about engines that didn't make sense anymore, about cars that used to be built to last, about how people once trusted mechanics the way they trusted doctors. Daniel didn't interrupt. At one point, Frank laughed quietly. Most folks think old places like this are useless. Daniel shook his head. Most folks don't know what they're looking at. That night, after everyone left and the garage lights were off again, the doubt crept back in. Frank sat alone at his kitchen table, the same can of soup warming on the stove. The house felt too quiet, too honest. What if this was temporary? What if it all disappeared just as fast as it came? He thought about contracts, lawyers, promises that sounded good but turned sour. He'd lived long enough to know hope could hurt worse than disappointment. He pulled out the old photograph again, him and Eleanor in front of the garage, her hand on his arm, her smile steady. What would you do? He whispered. The room didn't answer. The next week brought change faster than Frank could process it. Trucks arrived, real ones. Equipment he'd only seen in magazines was unloaded carefully onto his cracked concrete floor. New lifts, diagnostic tools, fresh paint that still respected the old bones of the place. But the sign stayed. Miller Auto Repair. Frank watched it all with mixed emotions. Gratitude tangled with fear. Every improvement felt like a reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. On a Thursday afternoon, Daniel returned, this time with a teenager in tow. This is Luis, Daniel said. 16. Smart kid. Know where to put that energy. Luis stood awkwardly near the doorway, hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, eyes darting around like he didn't want to break anything. Frank studied him the way he studied engines, patiently, carefully. You ever work on a car? Frank asked. Luis shook his head. No, sir. Frank handed him a wrench. Everyone starts somewhere. Luis smiled just a little. That smile did something to Frank's chest that no business deal ever could. Teaching was harder than Frank expected. His hands still knew what to do, but his body didn't always agree. By evening, his back screamed. His knees burned. Some nights, he lay awake wondering how long he could keep this up. One afternoon, his hand slipped while tightening a bolt. The wrench clattered to the floor. Luis rushed forward. You okay? Frank nodded, embarrassed. Just tired. He hated that word, tired. For the first time, he wondered if Daniel had been wrong. If maybe this second chance had come too late. Daniel found him alone in the garage that evening. You don't have to prove anything, Daniel said gently. Frank didn't look up. I don't want to be a symbol, he replied. I just want to be useful. Daniel paused. You already are. He told Frank something he hadn't shared before. When my father died, Daniel said, I inherited money, but I lost direction. Everything became about numbers, efficiency, growth. I forgot why businesses exist in the first place. Frank listened quietly. You reminded me, Daniel said. One free repair did that. Months passed. The garage filled with life again. Not lines of customers, but something better. Young people, apprentices, kids who didn't fit anywhere else. Frank taught them slowly how to listen, how to respect the machine, how to respect themselves. He no longer worked every hour. He didn't need to. His role had changed. One afternoon, as Frank locked up early, he noticed something that stopped him cold. A line of cars. Not because they had to be there, because they wanted to be. That night, Frank sat at the table again. Same chair, same room. But the silence felt different, not empty. Full. He looked at Eleanor's photo and smiled. We did okay, he whispered. The garage door never closed completely after that. Even on slow days, even on hard ones. Because sometimes the world doesn't need another big idea. Sometimes it just needs one old mechanic who fixes a stranger's car for free. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, subscribe to Old Whisper Stories. Because the quietest acts often leave the deepest echoes.